Yeah, I just put it on my Instagram story.
Oh, so we are live then. So I guess what's up, everyone? Welcome to a stream with the Voluntaryist Haven members with a special guest Spectrify on here. Um, and we're just going to be talking about general strategy, politics, general populism, and overall like libertarian ideas. A lot of talking the Libertarian Party and all these different things that are relevant to the movement today. And I guess what should we get started with?
Greg, do you want to say a few things about the passing of Horowitz?
Yes, and unfortunately, recently we had some pretty shocking news that Stephen Horowitz had passed away, and he was a great professor of libertarianism and both Austrian economics. He'd done some great work on free banking, deflation, and various other classical economic laws, and his book, Micro Foundations of Macroeconomics, was personally one of the best things I've ever read, and I couldn't recommend it anymore to anyone else. So I think you should definitely go out and buy some of Steve Horowitz's work and make sure that his legacy lives on within libertarianism, and that we never forget how much contributions he made to various aspects of monetary disequilibrium and free banking and all these various aspects that become various or even central core tenets of libertarianism and Austrian economics. Was
in the 8th grade, the first real introduction that I had to Austrian economics was his intro, and I don't know, it changed me. It breaks my heart. It broke my heart to see that.
It was definitely shocking, and it was completely unexpected and out of the blue. But he was a great man. He was clearly a very cheerful person, and we all wish his condolences to his friends and family and everyone affected by his death.
Mm-hmm. All right. Right now I'm praying that Papa John doesn't burst in here and start saying racial slurs. So.
Alright, yeah, we're chilling. So what's the first thing to talk about when it comes to pragmatic ideas?
Wasn't Greg just talking about the recent Libertarian Party tweet? We could probably start with that.
Yeah, it was just announced just there, I'm pretty sure, that the Arkansas Libertarian Party has signed another request to depart from the general Libertarian Party or the overall Libertarian Party and start a new party entirely to offer more options to the Arkansas voters. I believe this is the second vote. I'm not entirely sure though. It could have been more, but it's definitely been more than one.
I mean, yeah, they want to separate. I think just what we were saying a bit earlier, that party needs to get their shit together. You can't keep making these new options dividing the overall votes. As it stands now, we can't win a single election. The main thing we have to do is build up our movement and our support, and we can't do that when we're having all our biggest view of people available on the ballots being split up and not together as kind of one libertarian unit.
We've always been known for this, There's always been the stereotype that libertarians love their infighting. And, I mean, it's true. And, I mean, there's good sides to it and there's bad sides to it. But, I mean, it is time and time again been proven a true stereotype in the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, infighting.
A great characterization of that is just the divide between, I guess, minarchists and ANCAPs. You can just see that sort of manifest in the divide between the Libertarian Party. I mean, both parties, I'm assuming, are pro-state, but the divide between the two is still analogous.
Yeah.
The situation in Arkansas is not particularly new. This has happened before in other places as well, with the party chairs and different various leaders of parties already calling to separate and create new political parties out of the Libertarian Party that's already existed. I'm not particularly sure which state it was, but there was a Libertarian Party. It may have been the National Party. I'm not 100% sure. But there was a chair that decided that they called publicly that they were going to resign, and there was an anonymous person who they won't reveal that egged them on to continue to lead or rule over the party, and then they started calling for the splitting of the party, and all this resignation nonsense was happening at the same time, and it was confusing absolutely everybody. The chair was completely confused. Whatever the heck was going on inside the party, nobody even knows. It's crazy that that we can have this public calls for resignation and then we have these anonymous people behind the scenes that that somehow can egg them on to continue going, and then we have calls for resignation and splitting of the party. Something that
exactly. Like look at New Hampshire. We had the Mises Caucus dominating New Hampshire. They basically took it over. All of the chair members, the secretary, they were all Mises Caucus members. So then the Mises Caucus members got together and they decided the Pragmatic Caucus to be the chair of the party in New Hampshire. And that chair decided to kick all of them out, which completely violates the Libertarian Party's bylaws. And that the chair, like the head chair, not of the state, but of the National Libertarian Party, let it happen and is continuing to let it happen. It's just, it's shocking. And
Yeah, I think
it's disappointing.
I think the constant blunders of the Libertarian Party just raise what I think is a more important question on whether or not the best route is even to go through the government and through a Libertarian Party, or whether or not there's a better alternative.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's definitely a question that's been raised, the legality and of like say various methods like agorism and that sort of depart from basic electoral politics and say localist based strategy to a sort of a more extreme position of black markets and using that sort of method to get through the government by not interacting with them, because it seems to be that we just can't win against something of that stature. It's like almost using something that we're against to get through it. Like destroying something from the inside is difficult, but destroying it externally, at least in my opinion, seems to be an even tougher task, given that the electorate and the various tools the state has would far exceed our own and will always exceed our own, particularly in a progressive climate where egalitarianism and social institutions continue to gather more and more power.
Yes. Something else.
In a climate where the Libertarian Party doesn't have any real political power, it really does help. Like I agree, the Libertarian Party, it's a big blunder and it's a mess, and it really bothers me. But I think that's why its role is more to spread the idea of libertarianism than it is to win like actual political positions. And I think that's one reason why I've really been pushing for the Mises Caucus and to step away from pragmatism, because if we're really, in my view, if we're really going for pragmatism, then we would need a Ron Paul. We would need somebody to run for one of the major two parties that can appeal to a solid base and actually get on the debate stage, make a name for itself. Otherwise, I just don't see any actual political positions being filled.
That's 100% true, but also at the same time, the viability of another Ron Paul, like after again, like how Ron Paul was treated in the Republican Party, is very, very questionable. Because we know that if we go back to the sort of Republican stage Ron Paul era, we will be expelled from the party as quick as it can possibly be named. Will immediately be attested, and even that could create conflict within the Republican Party itself, which again could be of negative attribute to us, because then we'll have this sort of the right, which is basically our only hope at this point, the populist right, or appealing to the old sensation of pre-Bush, like that sort of era. If we go back to that era, we immediately would be expelled just like Ron Paul was, and we would immediately create conflict with that Republican Party. I personally don't think we have any more space in the Republican Party, and I don't think that
no, not after a Trump presidency.
Yeah, the Republican Party is too far gone at this point to really make any real change from there. But yeah, I get that. Like the main thing though, like strategy is not something a black and white thing. It's not one set exact way that to go about it. There's varying ways we can actually look to achieve a free society. But the most important thing is overall just spreading the idea, which Baker made a great point that the party itself is a great way of spreading ideas. Going around through the country and going around talking to new people and getting people into the movement is the overall what you have to do if you want to have a system. You want to have your overall society. Otherwise, it'll never happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, strategy is a complicated issue. Of course, it's not like it is in Austrian economics, or at least from the Misesian side. Like you obviously you've got the praxeology and you've got the sort of apodictic sort of claims, and then you've got that ultimate logical derision that Mises kind of implicated, and various advocates of Austrian economics, particularly in the lay, have taken that sort of position that there's these apodictic claims, and we can say from a set logical conclusion, and so long as these claims are undeniable, then boom, we've got it. But strategy isn't exactly that way. It's like there is no ultimate claim. It's about the reflection of social values and human behaviors and how we go about that and how we influence and entice people. It's fundamentally a human science to its core. That so it's a social and human science. That's what it is. And social and human sciences are fundamentally illogical. That's what they are. Human behavior is illogical. There's nothing logical about it. It's only the appeal to behaviors empirically, and and in that way we can only appeal to things that we know from society and our social values as a whole. So in that sort of framework of society and social values, when we can't use these sort of apodictic or a priori sort of foundations, we have this problem of creating like a beyond complex phenomena, because you've got complex phenomena in these a priori areas, but when you're looking at strategy and human behavior, it is completely beyond any sense of consciousness. It's way beyond that area. And trying to determine what the best strategy is, or optimal strategy, would be fundamentally impossible for any one thinker. So to continue to this path, we need fundamentally cooperation among all libertarians to contribute to strategy. What we have currently with the agorists and whatever the hell is going on between the Mises and the Pragmatic Caucus is completely unproductive to libertarianism, particularly the Pragmatic Caucus's behavior towards the Mises Caucus. Like, many libertarians, especially on Twitter, have been very insistent on calling various members of the Mises Caucus neo-Nazis, and that is insane to me. It's so unproductive and it's so detrimental to libertarianism. People who only decide that their main intention is to slander, say, like our founders like Rothbard or Mises or Hoppe for other personal social positions that don't really contribute to their ideology themselves, are completely unproductive to libertarianism. And I don't know why they can't get this.
I couldn't agree more. And I do, to an extent, I appreciate the Pragmatic Caucus, and I like the idea of it. I think that I think we need as many strategies as possible to achieve a free society. I think there's a place for agorism. Personally, I love the idea of decentralization, but it gets to a point where the Pragmatic Caucus gets to a point where it just sympathizes with this egalitarian, social safety net libertarian view. And there's no real distinction between libertarianism, bleeding heart libertarianism, and small scale social democracy.
Yep, exactly. It's sectarianism at its finest. It really is, and it's in this sort of way that like the Pragmatic Caucus, rather than advocating its principles, it actively contradicts the Mises Caucus in every way it can, and it actively contradicts libertarianism. And the best way that I can reflect this currently is with the recent calls for UBI. To me, that is a completely
yes.
I cannot reflect that any better. The Pragmatic Caucus calling for UBI and mandatory vaccinations and all this type of thing that sympathizes completely with statists and egalitarians is completely contrary to libertarianism. It's absolute insanity that we have libertarians sympathizing with the state. It's crazy.
There's no way that you can logically and without contradiction advocate for mandatory vaccinations. I can understand if you're saying we need UBI to wean ourselves off of welfare. Even then, I would disagree, because you can't fight cancer with cancer. Welfare is a cancer, so just get rid of it. But there's still a case to be made. Mandatory vaccines, on the other hand, no. Having forcing the government to stick a needle in your arm.
Yeah.
John Stuart Mill would be crying. Right?
Yeah. You can't be a libertarian and reject one of the fundamental principles of libertarianism itself. You have the right to your own body, but you don't at the same time type deal. The whole premise is that
what it is. It's like the Frankfurt Marxists. They among themselves, they said that when they were spreading their ideology, it's okay to lie about these little things because ultimately it's for the greater good. You're lying for the person when you're talking to somebody, you're lying to them for their own good. It's the same thing. A lot of these pragmatic libertarians are okay with lying or stretching the truth or not being, the most principled libertarians in the world because they think that they're doing it for that person's own good. When in reality, they're just making that person more dumb and wasting their time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that also raises the question, just to go back to what Baker was saying before, should there be multiple strategies employed at the same time? Should we just focus all our energy on one particular strategy and like what the best option is.
Well, when it comes to choosing a strategy, there's like basically like one general universal thing between all these strategies, and that is having a general societal support for your taking over a system. If you have 1% of the population in like divided throughout America, it's not going to be able to make any change done, no matter what strategy you really employ. You need numbers, and when you have numbers, then you can start going on to like what is the exact most efficient way to do it. But you still need those numbers in the first place.
So
I agree to a certain extent. But if you could get enough libertarians, if you could get enough libertarians in a small Republican state and have a really, really left-leaning president that those libertarians and those Republicans in that libertarian state don't like, that's a small number of people relative to the population of the United States, and you could possibly have secession or at least
I agree.
extreme nullification.
Yeah,
I totally agree with what you're saying, that like to have any like large-scale change in America or in Canada, you need the numbers.
Yeah.
The issue, at least to me, with the sort of old right or populist appeal that say the Rothbardian era had, or particularly the late Rothbardian era, is that the development of libertarianism as a general creed has begun to become way more pragmatic, as reflected in the Libertarian Party, in the sense that it's continually became more and more progressive. So as we continue to become more and more progressive, which is already embedded in electoral politics, and particularly with the last election run, with our support of Black Lives Matter and all cops, all that nonsense, it's that we've lost that old right populist appeal that Rothbard tried so hard to introduce, and we've completely abandoned it. The sort of old right that we used to have with the conservative traditional values, with the low time preference and all this sort of stuff, we can't appeal to that anymore, because libertarianism fundamentally has become an egalitarian, left-wing pandering shit show. That's what it's become. There's no way around that anymore because of progressives. And this is the fundamental problem. We cannot now go back to the old right without changing everything about our fundamentals again.
I agree, but I will say one thing. I think we can appeal to a certain extent to both parties, or not to both parties, both sides, the more progressive side, the more conservative side. Because we know that we're right. Like when it comes to the police, the left says defund the police. And then when you ask them, well, what are you actually going to defund the police? Like, no, we're not actually going to abolish the police. They just want to do a bunch of like reforms and stuff. We want to get rid of the police. We want to get rid of the monopoly on violence. So we can appeal to them, but we can also appeal to the paleo side, the more traditional side, right? Because we are for genuine hierarchy and genuine authority, like in the form of the church and in the form of capitalist institutions. So I think that it's easier to appeal to the right than it is to the left. And I think that we should focus on appealing to the right. Yeah. But there's definitely a place to appeal to some of the more logically thinking people on the left.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Just to interject here, just kind of somewhat relevant to that, to kind of bring it to some of like a more specific and kind of prevalent issue. It's just like when it comes down to it, most people are not as like politically involved as the average libertarian would be. And so Rothbard brought this up in For Liberty, and he was talking about how most people, when like you say like, oh, I'm against the government, and you hear the classic like, oh, what will happen to the roads, right? And he brings up how they will always treat you as someone who is trying to say, I'm against these like products that like state produces, like roads, national defense, and everything. But how do you guys think that we should go about spreading the information that it's not that we're against those things, but we're against the state producing those things and trying to explain a better alternative to them?
I think that you can just explain like how these public goods are not, I mean, to an extent, even like there's still like people still pay taxes for things, right? That's money you lose in taxes, the money you can be spending on these simple assets. And then I think the main point is to convince him that privately ownership of that would be better and likely more cost effective than the government running it.
You see, I think Michael Malice does it really well. When people ask him what is anarchy, he always says anarchy is a relationship, not a geographical location. And then he explains that like he'll be in a room with somebody and he'll say, "See, our relationship right now is anarchy because neither of us have authority over the other. If you had authority over me, it'd be completely voluntary." And then somebody will ask him, "Okay, what about courts? What about arbitration?" So then he uses the example of eBay. So if somebody ships a package to somebody and it gets lost in the mail, eBay has an arbitration system to resolve it in minutes. So he has all these little, I guess, anecdotes or things that he can compare a possible free society to. And it usually works pretty well. I mean, clearly, if you have somebody who's a little bit more critical, you have to get into the more into the specifics, and slight comparisons won't work. I think using real world, I guess, examples of anarchy in action, in my opinion, is effective.
Yeah, exactly. Like this can be the case with like private bodyguards and even like just very basic interactions, say like in a school or something, like you're arguing with a classmate or something, and then why would you need government to step in and resolve a conflict that exists when there's a variety of other people that are mature enough and able to resolve this conflict? What's the need for government to step in? And this is also like this is a state of anarchy constantly. We're always in a state of anarchy relative to one another, and particularly in geopolitics, this is the case. Like we see continual alliances being made, and we can see that the state of geopolitics, when it comes to social values and these types of things, can be very consistent with one another. And in that sort of sense, then we, in a state of anarchy, we can see cooperation brewing to in the sense that so long as things remain free in the state of anarchy, or the negotiations can happen back and forth, it tends to be that we have this sort of diplomacy between nations in the state of anarchy that avoids violent conflicts. When it comes to places like, say, the Middle East that don't share the same sort of liberal free trade values as we do, then obviously conflict brews. The problem is not spreading these values, but whether we should be spreading these values and to where we should be spreading these values, and whether it's efficient for us to do that. Why is it efficient for my community to go into this way vast off nation that can barely even benefit us through comparative advantage in the first place, and to spread these liberal democracies? That should be the question fundamentally. Why does it benefit my family? Why does it benefit my community?
Yeah, I agree. And I think just on the note of geopolitics, and just to bring this back to what the Libertarian Party, pragmatically, or just the Libertarian Party in general, do you guys think it should be pro-intervention or anti-intervention, and why?
Oh, anti-intervention in every way. Like it. So libertarian principles on their own are useful. They're useful for looking at the world. They're meaningful. But when it comes to the issue of war, it is the libertarian worldview is especially useful, because why is the United States, for example, able to spread its power to every reach of the globe? The Federal Reserve, it's got democracy behind it, so it's us doing it, not just the government. It's got the mainstream media, it's got the corporate media behind it, cheering it on. It's got the masses of its people, praying to its flag essentially every morning in the schools. So I think the only logical conclusion from a libertarian perspective is to be anti-intervention.
Yeah, completely agree. Interventionism completely goes against libertarian principles of freedom, liberty, all these different things. Like, everyone in the world deserves them, not just people in America. Like, we want everyone to have that. And
personally, I think one of the most important things is about dispelling how the state exploits patriotism and nationality. Particularly when it comes to intervention and wars, particularly foreign intervention as a whole, is particularly important to me, because I generally see that the state exploits nationality more than anything to spur on this sort of national attitude, where we have these foreign wars where actually we're not fighting for us at all. They pose no threat to us. They don't plan to pose a threat to us, and they don't have any sort of impact. They're trying to strike diplomatic deals, all these types of things, and sort of foreign policy. And yet we use this sort of national prowess type of idea that, oh look, it's British Empire or whatever, it's coming back, like all this type of ridiculous national ideas to spread these interventionist ideas. And any sort of justification for interventionism is usually done with patriotism. And it's unfortunate because patriotism is not a bad thing within itself. Like, if you want to be proud of your country and its accomplishments, good, great for you. You should do that 100%. That's a great idea. But when it comes to the fact that governments themselves are exploiting it to expand their own powers, and what this is fundamentally is introducing multiculturalism to places, and this sort of multicultural societies that we've been developing, and this open immigration and this huge welfare state to induce more, it's destroying the core of Western civilization itself. What we are is no longer us. What our nationality is supposed to be no longer represents us. What America is not what it used to be. What Scotland is for me is not what it used to be. This place is a progressive shithole. It's genuinely shocking. It is terrible. It's purely progressive, and we've lost all sense of actual cultural or nationality. And this is particularly important for me because, again, Scotland is known for being extremely cultural, and there's, like, say, the Kelpies, and there's the castles and everything, and there's so many things that indicate our heritage. And yet people don't seem to care about this in the slightest, and don't seem to identify with the Scottish attitude anymore. And this is the thing for me, because when you come to the when you come to the points that you're losing your culture itself to progressivism, and you're assimilating with all these varieties of different cultures, whether it be Middle Eastern, whether it be other European cultures, you're losing a sense of self-identity as a whole. And as you lose a sense of self-identity, patriotism doesn't become protecting yourself anymore. It becomes protecting this sort of everyone, which again just reinforces this egalitarianism that we continually see in modern society.
Yeah. Happening.
Another thing is, go ahead.
All right. I was trying to say, like, yeah, I mentioned like Scotland and America, but like it's happening all over Western civilization, to like North America, to Western Europe. And these ideas are being engraved everywhere now. It's like if you really find an actual place for the people who want to conserve their culture and have the actual ideas. There's some places in like the Eastern world where there's still some people who still like abide by more traditional values, but like specifically in the West, yeah, it's getting destroyed, and like the overall values in society have drastically shifted, and there's no real like unity anymore, and it's all divided by progressive egalitarians.
It's a perfect example of government failure. They've done this generally libertarians are kind of pro open borders. It's more nuanced than that. But they've taken it a step further. They are actively importing as many immigrants or as many refugees from Syria, the Syria that the Western world blew up and destroyed. They're actively importing as many as possible in the name of progressivism. And what it's giving rise to is actual legitimate fascism, like genuine fascism in Italy and in Poland. You can see videos of people in the streets doing the Hail Hitler salute. So it's just another example of why governments are so bad at everything, even the social engineering. They suck at it. Like it's
yeah, like on immigration though, that's an important pragmatic topic, because even within libertarians, it's still a divided topic. We got people like Walter Block who support like basically complete open borders, even like right now. Same with David Friedman, but there's people like Hunter and Hoppe who are like more opposed to that, like by a lot, under like the current system we exist in. I tend to generally agree that like immigration itself, it's beneficial when we have like properly structured societies, but like right now it's doing more harm than good in general, I'd say.
I'd take it a step further and say that general immigration, at least from a multicultural standpoint, is more than often harmful. And in that general sense, it's not the sort of economic effects themselves, because they could be beneficial in the sense, but it comes to that point where you have an optimum amount of expansion. And you should have a strict process of assimilation and integration to the point where you're basically assimilating to another member of the same culture. It's really dependent on that cultural aspect for me, because it's a sort of sense of self, and to keep that sort of community in the sense of cooperation and the division of labor and the wide division of knowledge and these sort of extensive supply chains that we've developed over centuries of Western values, that we have these sort of divisions of labor constituted by social cooperation. When we have these multicultural societies where people can't understand each other's cultures and where they oppose them and they feel uncomfortable around them, we have these sort of backstops to cooperation and societal change. That when it becomes to the point where people begin to feel uncomfortable in their own communities and in their own households, say like again with a very like degenerate behaviors of like party goers or something like that, and the general community, that sort of being as it is makes people uncomfortable within their own setting, and as they're uncomfortable in their own setting, they'll generally feel more uncomfortable cooperating, and that sort of antisocial behavior that it induces is widely destructive to economic effects. And that's personally why I think the immigration case is, while it could be positive on say like employment or creating jobs or something like that, it's also widely harmful to the actual contract and libertarian order as itself.
Yeah.
And I there's no coincidence that Walter Block and David Friedman contrast to Hans Hermann Hoppe and some of the other European libertarian thinkers. I think that's for a very obvious reason. That is, Germany and the rest of Europe has always been a very historically white continent, like over 90%. The United States is different. The United States has always, it's been ingrained in American culture that there are distinct people groups within certain geographical locations. So in America, we've adapted a little bit more to integrating ourselves and separating ourselves. If you go, I live in Nashville. It's the same way in Texas. There's Hispanic neighborhoods, there's white neighborhoods. Sometimes they mix, sometimes they don't. In Europe, it's been a shock for them. In America, we've always had this. It's been a gentle trickle of immigrants. Sometimes we've had more coming in than others, but America's always been really good at managing that socially, without any attempt to engineer that on a state level. Europe is the exact opposite. There's been forced integration. There's been, explosions of refugees spilling over the borders, coming in by boat. So I think sometimes they're comparable, but they're not exactly. I don't think it's a perfect comparison. I think the United States and Europe are definitely two very distinct and different issues when it comes to immigration. I think the United States can afford to be a little more lenient, where Europe cannot.
I mean, with the U.S. though, it's already fucked. U.S. is already fucked. So,
when it comes to Europe, yeah, it's generally a far more historical place in the sense that it allowed for cooperation among the white race itself, and that sort of forced integration that's been happening over recent progressive ages is clearly having a devastating effect on social cooperation. Like, it's not so much that case in America, because mostly America's never really had that sort of attitude, which is mostly reflecting the saying that most people, or at least I think most Americans believe, that it's a nation built on immigrants. We don't have that same attitude over here in Europe. What we have is that we built our nation by our own hard work and labor, and because we built our nation, why should we have to accept all these people that are coming in from places where they completely failed to build the nations? And why should we have to accept all these people, which is again reflecting like the backlash to the EDL and even political motives, like the government seeing that these were completely overbearing on, say, like the housing market and places like that. They tried to not even force integration, but force dissipation. They were paying people to leave the country and go back to their home countries. It's absolute insanity. You're paying people to leave your own country. What type of world is that ever supposed to happen in? It's
clearly that's going to breed, what it's doing in Italy. Clearly that's going to breed fascism, and like what happened in America to a certain extent with Trump's populist movement, the anti-immigration movement. But it can get to a point where it turns violent, and we've seen certain rallies in Austria and some in Poland where it has gotten violent. There has been people killed, and it's a shame, and it is the fault of mismanagement by the state.
Oh yeah, 100%. And then there's also the case of, like, say, Sweden, which is having horrible social conflict due to complete immigration, and say like Germany with Angela Merkel, like this sort of forced integration of refugees to societies that clearly are unwilling to accept them is widely socially destructive. There's riots everywhere, there's protests, and all these sort of borderline revolutionary activities that are going on is utterly insane. Like, this should not be happening in a modern society, and that much is clear.
Yeah, it's different in the United States. You know, we've got 300, 400 years of quasi tradition, but it's tradition made up of a bunch of different, different people groups to a certain extent. We've always been a majority white country, but Europe is thousands of years of very strict tradition. Like, that's not something that can change overnight, and that's what people are trying to implement by force.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so should we bring it back to the Libertarian Party then?
We could bring it back to like libertarian like strategy. I had something I wanted to bring up about agorism.
Go ahead.
Like counter econ. Yeah. So like there are like certain agorists who are in favor of like banning certain things because like it'll increase the black market or expand the counter economy. I think that's
yeah. God, I despise that attitude so much. I hate it. I genuinely hate it. I would beat up anyone who says it. But the attitude that we should like make things illegal simply because they expand the counter economy is completely contrary to the purpose of agorism itself. The only reason that agorism is a viable strategy is because of state force. The only reason that we have to revolt or resort to agorism is because the state is using force. It's almost like a want to make a strategy or a want of statism. They want to impose more force in order to expand the backlash, I guess, by themselves against the state. It's virtue signaling at its finest. It really is. It really is virtue signaling. And in that sort of way, by expanding the use of state force to create more black markets, they're destroying people's lives. Like the war on drugs, what's happened with like the prices shooting up in the black markets compared to what you could generally get if they were legal. Like this is weed or something like that. Prices on the black market, and especially, in fact, prohibition's a best example I can think of this. The prices of alcohol on the black market shot up, and yet consumption barely shrank for most of alcohol. Like I believe the highest rate in the UK was or minimum alcohol pricing in the UK was what, 8% on cider or something like that. That's not a big drop at all, and it really didn't reduce that much. Prohibition was a massive failure, and yet it still shot up prices and destroyed people's lives. You can't just make these instantaneous changes to things that people are addicted to, and they have these social values that already accept them. Like when you have say like this society that's completely set and accepting people who use drugs and this whole rehabilitation culture and this type of thing, would you then go on to illegalize drugs, like say out of the blue, and then you shoot them to the black market? That's going to cause widespread destruction. Family homes and all these sort of traditional values, churches, everything, it will all be completely out of range. Like,
that reminds.
Yeah.
Okay, so that reminds me of something. Michael Malice and Scott Horton have both been asked this question. They both have very different answers. I don't really know where I line up with it, but it kind of has to do with strategy. It's like this: if you had a red button that when you pressed it eliminated the state completely, would you press it? Now, Scott Horton says that he definitely would not. Michael Malice says otherwise. What do you guys think?
I think it can be compared to the boom and bust cycle in a sense. It's like it's similar to me, the question that should we expand monetary activity to keep the boom or the bust from collapsing as far as it can go, rather than allowing the necessary readjustments and whatnot, which will be vastly socially destructive, but in the long run will create much more growth and prosperity and happiness and all this general libertarian talk. But it's the question really of how much impact it would have on general people's lives. So the question is difficult, that you could say that you would go for this abolitionist approach and you'd immediately eliminate like the welfare state, the central bank, and all this type of stuff. But what would follow from that is a collapse of everything.
I completely agree, and I agree completely with what you're saying. Like it would kind of be like a post-recession. But what you said, what happens when an artificial credit bubble keeps expanding? It gets worse and worse. So think about the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union lasted any longer, if it got any larger, then the downfall, or then the effects of the downfall of the Soviet Union would have also gotten progressively worse and worse as time went on. So I think I think it would kind of reflect that.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer in the sense that everything would collapse, but at the same time, you have to take into consideration that in the long run, at least in my opinion, the state is bound, and all the monetary systems that exist and social institutions, they are bound to collapse in the long run in the first place. Yes. So it's the question of whether we do it now, which is also from a strategy standpoint pretty untenable considering the attitude that's been happening towards free markets, considering the busts. Like we explained boom bust cycles to be caused by central banks, but the fact that they stimulate credit and they create these artificial bubbles that create prosperity for a very short period of time in people's lives induces this sort of attitude that free markets were the cause of the bust because the government didn't interfere enough or expand credit enough to create another boom within that bust. It's like this. It's in the sense that the short run effects for the general population will always outweigh the long run effects, and there's not really a way around that. So the question of abolitionism is if it was possible, whether it would be a good idea of political strategy or whether it would be a sustainable libertarian society, given that we would be responsible for the abolition of the government and virtually the collapse, even though the government created that collapse. So the cause is fundamentally with the government, but the way politics sees it would be the libertarians and the anarchists, which is the fundamental problem of a sustainable society.
Yeah, I put the button because Dave Freeman's talked about it. He always asks the question that will a new state form if we just get rid of this one instantaneously, which is a very possibility as people themselves aren't really much knowledgeable on ANCAP society. If I could like set up everything my own way, then yeah, I'd do it. But if it's just like from here to abolish it, yeah, it doesn't be a big collapse. But I think it could still be able to recover from that to lead to a more prospering, like overall free society.
So a lot of the times, statists will say, governments are natural. This is just what people got up and decided to do one day, kind of the idea of a social contract. People got together and decided to start a government, but that's not at all what happened. This wasn't some natural thing that it wasn't spontaneous. It didn't spontaneously occur. It's not spontaneous order. It has to be obtained through violence, through large scale violence and coercion. So I do think that it would be possible for states to reemerge again, but not in the way that we have this modern Leviathan state, because modern statism is new. It's only been around, for the past 300 years at most, because of the rise of democracy, because people can now identify more with the state than they used to be able to. Used to, a king was just some dick living in a king on a hill. Now, the president is your president. You voted for him.
In a sense,
I don't think that we'd see that reemerge.
In a sense, you can also say that the voter, in a sense, owns a part of the government because they have like a share in it, so they vote on it. Which Hoppe brings up in Democracy of the Gods that failed a lot, like the way that the democracies work and why they're bad in general.
People can identify with democracies. Yeah. They identify themselves as the governor of their own lives, when in reality they're not. Murray Rothbard talks about that in Anatomy of the State, which everybody should go read for free or listen to on YouTube.
Yeah, no, it's 100% true. The history of the state, and everyone needs to know this, the history of the state is a history of violence. There is nothing more to it. The history of the state is a history of violence. There is nothing more. That is the history of a state. It was only able to form out of totalitarian and violent measures. They were only able to form because they killed more than their opposition. That was the only reason they could form. And in that sense, people need to understand that. And this is why I think that philosophers like Robert Nozick and his book Anarchy, State and Utopia are completely anti-productive to the libertarian cause, with his ridiculous conception that states can form immaculately and that they just social contractly form. Shut up!
Wait.
Get lost.
On the thing of social contract.
Never formed. Never once formed peacefully. It was formed by revolution.
Yeah. Like also, like Kirk mentioned social contracts, which is a big thing, and Baker also brought up like the Leviathan state. Yeah, there's even difference in the original Leviathan idea, but the Leviathan idea now, like the way we can apply it to like, the general way society works, it more so applies to everyone instead of just the ruler, which it was originally conceptualized. As
Yeah.
again with the idea of democracy, and Craig's 100% right. States do not form generally naturally; always form through violence, through conquest, through coercion.
Yeah, I think Hobbes, when he was originally coming up with the idea of a Leviathan state, it was right after the English Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So for him to state that life without a government was nasty, brutish, and short, on the surface, it seems like, okay, that's fair. He lived in the middle of a civil war. But then you pause for a moment and you remember, who started the Civil War? Two governments started it. So it seems like the cause of life being nasty, brutish, and short isn't the lack of a state, but the exact result of the state.
Yeah, I think with Hobbes,
you just described what the abolitionism thing is. The cause is fundamentally the government, and yet somehow the non-government peoples end up getting blamed for the government's failures. It's
exactly like Michael Malice said. Every seemingly good argument against anarchism or a free society is a description of the world under a society with government. You're exactly right.
Yeah, like I think Hobbes. I think Hobbes is just like one of the worst like political philosophers. I have to read about him. His idea on the state of nature was stupid as hell. His solution to it was even worse. He said that in the state of nature, everyone has the right to claim everything, so there can't be any type of security. And he says every single person should give up their liberty to have security from an absolute monarch who can do literally anything. Anything. And the only time you can ever revolt against this justified social contract they formed absolute monarch is if they like put a gun to your head, and that's it. They can do everything else according to Hobbes' own theory of Leviathan, which to me is absurd. And his ideas are taught so much today. Like even
I learned them in my civics class.
I learned it from my philosophy class, and it was so bad. Like reading through his stuff. Like it's not even just him. Although John Locke was a million times better than Hobbes, he still believed in like a form of social contract to have a government.
He was still a Hobbesian.
Yeah, they disagreed on a lot of things. They disagreed on what the form of government is, what the role of government is, what the state of nature is, and is it good or bad. But like Locke's critique of the state of nature was kind of trash. It's just in general like, different people go to war to have conflict resolution, and they don't realize that anarchists can do the same thing. But the solutions are just so far-fetched. You want to get everything to one power, and you can say that
exactly.
Because
if you've got crazy people in the general populace, okay. Hobbes assumes that just about everybody is basically a psychopath. He basically describes human nature as he describes humans as psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
Humans aren't psychopaths.
Yeah,
the majority of people, if there wasn't a government, wouldn't go out murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that was the case, you definitely wouldn't want one or a collection of psychopath leaders controlling the rest of the populace. That would be absolutely. That would be the exact opposite of what you want.
Yeah.
No, to me at least, it's whoever advocates for if there's social conflict and this conflict is going on, and then you have these conflicts and you can't resolve them peacefully. What would be psychopathic behavior is to give up all measures of resolving that conflict to one central agency.
Exactly.
Yep. Exactly.
That is psychopathic.
Yeah. But in all the social contract theorists, because social contracts is basically like the only justification they use nowadays for states. My least favorite is probably Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was a communist before communism existed. He believed that in a social contract, everyone gives up their right to property, basically, and everything should be equal and have a complete egalitarian society. And he just annoys me with social contracts. It's all social contract theorists are. We have to take them down, right? Otherwise, you really won't be able to.
Oh God, here he comes. Here he comes.
What's up, Papa John?
I knew he was coming.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the general social contracts. I guess unless anyone else has something to say on that, I guess we can move something else.
Yeah, we should probably talk about the LP's messaging. That's a pretty big important
True.
point. So the party is absolutely insane in the sense that it fails to actually have any decent internal management, or the conflict within the party is something we still need to go on about because there's a lot to say about that. The messaging of the LP that the younger Mises Caucus members have been implementing, particularly in New Hampshire with the civil rights tweets and the child labor tweets, and all this type of thing that people have been ridiculing them for. I personally think that the ridicule is out of place. And this is particularly true when you look at the Mises Caucus, not the Mises Caucus, the LP party generally. The LP party generally had these things explicitly stated in its platform for years on years, and not a single person touched on it. Not a single person said anything about it until a tweet was made by the LP about their own principles that nobody has talked about for years, and then suddenly everybody goes batshit insane.
It's been our own party platform since 2002.
Yeah, they haven't, has there really been, a libertarian in the Libertarian Party in the last few years? I was talking to Mises Caucus, who was, actually outlined, the actual standard of libertarianism and what the LP stands for. They don't seem to have much consistency in their beliefs. It always changes. Me, Baker, Craig, Speck, Brent, we can all say we have our own beliefs, right? We might change our beliefs from time to time, but overall we're still rooting the same principles. Well, the Libertarian Party doesn't really emphasize that, and that's what needs to be emphasized if you want to have a free society to come to fruition.
Yeah, the Libertarian Party a lot of the times it advertises itself as a party of principle, which to a certain extent I think that's true. I think that the Libertarian Party compared to the Democratic Party is more synthesized, especially compared to the Republican Party. They're all over the place. But there's one side that is outright lying to try to get what it wants, compared to the more principled Mises Caucus side, which is telling the truth. Yeah, maybe it's a little abrupt in the form of a tweet, but it's still the truth. It's still the principles that our party has been for since 2002.
Yeah, exactly. How we spread social values is not by hiding them. We need to stand our ground and say our values as they are. Of course, we need to adapt them to the environment in question. And the phrasing of the tweets that came out by the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, they weren't great. Of course, there is work to do. The messaging strategy overall is literally just saying our principles as they are. And that is what we should be going off. People who oppose this are the same people who will slander the Mises Caucus, calling them neo-Nazis and racists, and call Rothbard a race realist, and hop at all these disgusting derogatory names, and then they continue to go in these same areas. And then once we reach this point, it's a conflict particularly only for power for the pragmatic caucus. You're only giving up to statism. You're not helping the libertarian cause. You just want power in the party.
Do you know who explained the idea of civil rights wonderfully? And I don't say this lightly. Ben did a really good job when he was on TikTok explaining that it was all about consent. I was taken back by how, I don't want to say eloquent because that sounds a little like he was writing or something, but he did a good job, and he did a really good job at making the left seem like the bad guys, because they're not for consent. They're not for, they're anti-consent inherently.
Do you want to say anything, Brian?
I really did like the way that Ben put it, and I think it definitely did show a lot of people that are not at kind of the same understanding that a lot of us are. Just kind of that general, the leftist kind of, that kind of consent versus just that kind of dichotomy, and just kind of putting that on showcase and just showing how unprincipled they can be. I think it's definitely very beneficial.
Yeah.
It's, I guess, the lack of a foundational framework to explain things from. This stemmed fundamentally from Marx and can be applied to the leftist system as a whole, in the sense that through this sort of historical materialism explanation of things, they abhorred people, the utopians, they called them, the utopians. That characterization, of course, is very negative, but all that really means is that they try to explain and defend their systems. if Marxists were consistent, I don't see why they advocate for Marxism at all, or why communism. It must merely be a game to them. They believe that the historical forces moving through society and how society will develop is not dependent on intellectual forces in any way. So why in the world are they wasting all their time spending on these social medias just to toy with words? What's the purpose?
Exactly. It all stems from Hegel, and it stems from their view of language. It's not, you're not supposed to understand it. Like a lot of them don't understand it. You know, Gannon kind of.
Yeah, but even with Hegel, like
what?
Even with Hegel, I think a lot of Marxists don't understand Hegel at all. He's one of like the most complex philosophers to read, and if you actually understand like a lot of his work, his conclusions seem more fascistic, not like communist at all.
Yes.
Oh no, 100%. And yeah. I think this is the general idea with the neo-Marxist frame at all. Their point is not to spread Marxism itself or whatever. They don't advocate for a system or whatever. They don't actually spread any intellectual relevance. What they do is they eccentrically make these ridiculous comments that put into actual language would make absolutely no sense to sort of spread this message that that capitalism is bad purely based on titles, because this is the same reason why I don't think many of them can actually defend any of their possessions, because none of them know their possessions. They use undefinable words, and they use words they don't know what they mean, and then they spread these eccentric walls of text, as they call them, in order to make themselves feel better about this sort of this anti-capitalist thing, even though they actually have no sort of implications on any real-world thing or have anything to say about anything.
Yeah, I think another thing with a lot of like the Marxists and neo-Marxists is that they will critique the fuck out of capitalism, but have no actual solution to it. If you can't provide me a better system than the one I support, I have no reason to support any of your ideas at all. We can say that these inherent issues, like capitalism. Yeah, we live in a world of scarcity. There's no such thing as like perfect allocation of resources or any of these different things. But if you try to critique my system and can't provide a better alternative, then I don't care what to say.
Yeah, no, 100%, and it's the same thing. I'm pretty sure Hayek had a similar saying that you can present problems all you want, but if you have no solution to those problems, then you're completely missing the first step. The first step is to identify the problems, come up with a solution, and then verify the actual problem itself. This is how it should go. What we need fundamentally to present a criticism is a solution. If there is no solution, then this criticism is irrelevant. It's something that we cannot solve, and it's therefore irrelevant to intellectual discourse at all. If every system is applicable, there is no measuring metric between these two systems within that context of that one critique. So long as that's the case, and so long as there is no solution to these varieties of problems that can be viably presented, the problem then is to come up with a solution within or using these various systems. It's not to continue critiquing them, these ridiculous eccentric languages. It's to make your writing more accessible. It's to make things easier for the layman to understand. And it's to come up with viable political solutions to these problems that you present.
I think some of the best critiques of leftism comes from I don't want to say less educated, because it's not less educated. They're actually smarter than other leftists. I guess less educated leftists. By that I mean leftists that want to use everyday language and actually speak English. You know, speak the common tongue. You know, not talk out of your ass. It's just because you see on TikTok, for example, and on Twitter, people always saying, "Oh, Foucault, I don't know how to say his name. It's too complicated. I can't understand any of this stuff." Yeah, you're not supposed to be able to understand it.
Yeah, no, I remember actually, I don't particularly watch like Jordan Peterson, but I remember him talking about people like, I forgot who it was.
Derrida, Lacan.
Yeah, exactly. And
I saw that.
Their game is not to spread or advance intellectual efforts. It's to present themselves as academics that you can understand. And so long as you can't understand them, there's nothing you can do with them. but pretend you understand them. And this is particularly the case on TikTok with Sterner. Like, we've seen this whole egos thing, and not a single person understood what the hell that man was on about. And yet, there's so many of these people just flocking, actually like seagulls to a goddamn chip. It's shocking, it really is.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get back to the main point then. Strategy, Libertarian Party, populism, Trump, wars. Okay. Where should we go from here then, Brent? Do you want to say anything? Spec, do you want to say anything?
I got something quick I just like to ask, is because when Craig, you were kind of going on the little tangent about sticking to our values, right? With like those kind of tweets that were just pretty blunt. So I know that some people, they definitely just with like the term libertarian or anarchism, they kind of have just a societal, just kind of negative connotation, and people will already feel negatively about those things without even trying to understand them. And so do you think it would be best that we try to redeem those kind of terms in like the colloquial use? Or do you think we should move to, like, instead of saying anarcho-capitalist, right? When most people would hear that, it sounds a little scary to them.
Mm-hmm.
You sound
That's
like
why I say voluntarist. Just
I have
Should we
opinions
be moving more
on
towards these more accepted and less harsh sounding terms, or should we try to redeem those?
I think it depends. I think it absolutely depends. If somebody is curious and somebody is genuine in their interest, then I think you can use some of the more abrupt terms. This is just me, in my experience. But if you're talking to somebody who doesn't care, who is a little bit more prudent, less curious, it might be a waste of time talking to them. But if you decide to talk to them, I think you should use terms like voluntarist, something like that.
Yeah, I generally think it more depends on the term itself and its connotations than the actual person you're talking to. See, like, the term anarcho-capitalist, I personally think should be abandoned. But the term capitalist itself, I think, should be reclaimed as the principles of voluntary exchange and all this type of stuff. Like, the fact that people somehow think that our current society is capitalist is beyond shocking. Genuinely shocking. We currently have systems all over the world inspired by World War II fascist Italy. It's absolutely insane that you think this is capitalist. Like, this is the antithesis of capitalist. It's the idea behind capitalism is voluntary principles of contract, exchange, and mutually beneficial activities, and this sort of productive and growth-based models. That is capitalism. Capitalism is growth. That's what capitalism is. But the terms like anarcho-capitalist are, in fact, anything associated with anarchism, I generally don't think that we should use. I think we should disassociate with anarchism, mostly based on the history of it and the now accepted definitions of abolishing all hierarchy, because that's nonsense. Nobody wants to abolish all hierarchy. One, that's not even possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Two, hierarchy generally, as in the sense of like institutions like churches and families and this type of stuff, we don't want to abolish that. Why in the world we want to abolish that? That is the most mutually beneficial social institutions that ever exist. What currently the anarchists believe, or the history of anarchism is these communist mutualist scum. What we generally think is that we should disassociate from the left. We should remove this sort of association with this socially liberal, fiscally conservative nonsense, and the anarchist theories of history we should also disassociate with, because we're not anarchist. Anarchists believe in this nonsense about property rights, that we should abolish all property rights or whatever. What we believe in is a productive, growth-based society based on charity, mutual aid. We believe that I think these sort of voluntary principles of exchange and property rights and contracts should all be upheld for a truly growth-based society. What these other anarchists will do, they'll decree you for talking about your system. They're fundamentally unethical scum, and we should not associate with them.
Yeah. I think
I agree that we need to abandon the term anarcho-capitalist, at least until we reclaim the word capitalist. And for the most part, I agree that we shouldn't even use the term anarchist, because its connotation is with like the Sex Pistols. Anarchy is just chaos.
Yeah.
Anarchy and chaos are used as synonyms in modern language. So until we can reclaim those words, until we can make anarchy mean the abolition of all unjust hierarchy, I think that it should be, for the most part, unless you're talking, for me, I think unless I'm talking to somebody like Brent or like Alex or like you, I think that, you know what I'm saying.
To understand the connotation of what we actually mean.
Yeah, but I think a big thing is that if we're already looking to reclaim the term capitalism as to our own thing, then it also would become kind of redundant to just call it anarcho-capitalism after, as if we'd already reclaimed it, then everyone would already support our ideals. By putting anarcho in front, that just adds a negative connotation to it from the previously existing anarchist system.
That's a good point. Genuine capitalism, from our point of view, is inherently absent of
capitalism is just voluntarism.
I completely agree. Like, even if you're looking from like what private property issuance or record, it's inherently a voluntarist. It's inherently voluntarist by itself. And what else I want to say? Also, in regards to strategy, more specific, and we brought up like the mutualists and the communists. This leads to a thing of like anarchist unity. Possibly the most dumb thing I've heard in my life, and a lot of people still support it. That like anarcho-capitalists should ally themselves to anarcho-communists, mutualists, like any type of anarchist, because they believe that the state is like the most like important thing to get rid of. But
I think any ideology that advocates for revolution and for the killing of other ideologies just based on the fact that they oppose that other person's ideology, we should not ally ourselves with.
Yeah, 100%.
If you're a communist and you just want to do your own thing in a field in the middle of nowhere, I don't have any problem with that. But I think it's best for optics if we don't ally ourselves with those people outright.
And it's not even just an optical position, it's the fact itself that we fundamentally completely oppose each other.
No, you're right.
Anarchist unity or whatever is a shockingly bad idea for the fundamental reason that we shouldn't put anarchy first. The government provision of defense services, while it should be a desirable goal and all, in the long run, free markets are significantly more important. Making people's lives more prosperous and free, and instituting this sort of anti-progressivism and our general culture, and allowing this sort of this sort of principles of exchange and beneficial and mutually involuntary, and all these types of buzzwords, I guess, in the general sense of people's languages. Then allowing that sort of system and people to become accustomed to these sort of words and these ideals is significantly more important than going for this sort of allying with people who are perpetrating the very thing that we are trying to avoid. They are what we don't want to be. That is what communists and left libertarians are.
Like if you're fundamentally, if you're anti-private property and general capitalism, like how we would view it as, you are not an ally. You will never be an ally. You are an enemy, and you must be defeated and slain. Simple enough.
maybe physically removed. Slain.
I mean, that assumes they're people in the first place to say we shouldn't do it.
No, that is a good point.
Anywho, should we talk about some
Austrian?
We should talk about Austrian. I wasn't going to talk about Austrian, but because if Austrian weren't strict of science, positive science, more how would you guys view pragmatic ideas to transitioning towards free banking and getting away from the Fed?
A pragmatic view for the Fed is to have it abolish itself.
Yeah, sure. How do we go about that? That's the real question. That's a big part.
That literally, Hayek talks about that. It's like the denationalization of money. Hold up, I can't talk right now, but that's practically what he talked about.
Right.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation because it doesn't seem like we're gonna ever return to the era of free banking at the current moment. So what the best thing I could suggest is first and foremost, if there's ever the opportunity, immediately advocate for the abolition of central banks. We don't need them in the slightest.
Yeah.
And even if there is a crash afterwards, it's not as if it's uncommon to what the Fed done itself.
Yeah.
So nothing really changes by abolishing the Fed, but producing long-run growth and actual monetary stability in the long run. The issue is more fundamentally actually getting to the point of abolishing the central banks. That is virtually the moment impossible. So what the best thing that I could suggest at the moment is imposing these sort of say like changing liability requirements on banks. So like senior banks or whatever are penalized and financially penalized for banks going under, and these sort of ideas of producing these much higher degrees of liability and exchanging loans and sending out people's deposits. That would impose far more conservatively viewed sort of expanding of reserves and lending. But the most fundamental thing, I think, anyway, is to take Milton Friedman's monetary rule and impose that on the central banks, so it can only at best or at most create like a 3 to 4% annual money supply growth. And in that way, you could at least impose some sort of discipline, because the gold standard is not coming back. It's gone. We're beyond the gold standard now. There is no possible way that we could possibly come back to the gold standard at this point. It's long gone. People are too accustomed to fiat money. What we can do is we can impose a monetary rule that Friedman suggested and limit the monetary growth in a stagnant amount. And in times where it's necessary to expand the money supply more to match the inside demand for money, then that can allow for exceptions and different things, such as like, especially with the moves toward fiscal QE, like ruling out the purchase of short-term treasury securities and repealing the Treasury Fed Accord and all these types of things, and stopping the transaction from the Fed's balance sheet over what was it, 10 billion, something like that, all to the Treasury because of their earnings. That needs to be stopped immediately, and there has to be certain restrictions on the Fed's purchase securities and these different types of things to prevent this sort of ridiculous expansion of the floor system and these continual balance sheet adjustments that go upward and upward, and to give the Fed a reason to stop supporting government expenditure, and to give the government a reason to actually pay off their debt, because we're now in a situation where debts are going crazy, interest rates cannot go back to like pre-2008 levels, because obviously it would cause mass destruction if interest rates were to rise again. Like, we need interest rates to rise; they will inevitably rise, but it will be disastrous because of government debt. And this sort of push toward fiscal QE and general quantitative easing and this sort of uneasy monetary policy, that should be of major concern to investors into the economy. And like, fundamentally, we need to stabilize government budgets. That's what we need currently. We need to reduce expenditures. We need the free market to come in, and we need to just let the market do what it does best.
I think fundamentally, no matter what we do, it's just prolonging the inevitable. I agree with you, and I think we should put those things in place. And I think that it can reduce harm, but it's going to get really, really bad someday. And that's when I hope that's when we're going to see actual change. It's going to get so bad that it can't get any worse. So somebody's going to say, screw it, let's end the Fed. And then they're going to end the Fed. And then praying, hoping for it every day.
Yeah.
Not for like the disaster part, the end of the Fed part.
I think all Bitcoiners should just screw off and become philanthropy bankers.
I'm not opposed to Bitcoin. I'm not going to do it. I don't want the gold bugs getting on me. And poor Bitcoiners, they're even worse.
I'll make a preliminary statement. I won't say much, but essentially, I don't believe Bitcoin can become a suitable medium of exchange. And I think personally it's too volatile, and I personally think that it's, for the most part, a teenage speculative bubble. But when it comes to like actually using Bitcoin as a currency and promoting libertarian ideas, the currency's existence itself and the sort of ability that it's produced to get away from government currency and to hold in different cryptocurrencies, or to hold in governments, holding different things from governments itself, and storing wealth in stocks and different value assets or buffer stocks. That sort of thing that Bitcoin has alleviated for a lot of people is really beneficial. So Bitcoin itself is not too bad. The messaging, the decentralized idea that it came with, can produce really positive effects. But Bitcoin as a currency or a suitable medium of exchange, I personally think it's nothing more than a gateway to a better decentralization of money.
Yeah,
I like the fact that it introduced the idea of competing currencies, but at the moment it is too volatile to be an actual currency. That's where things like Ethereum come in.
Yeah.
But even though Ethereum is stable, the blockchains are too large.
Yeah.
It can't really be used as a medium of exchange.
Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to like transaction costs. I'm not sure what the case is with Ethereum, but with Bitcoin, the transaction costs as a local medium of exchange are absolutely insane. Like it's crazy. I'm pretty sure I've heard someone that bought like a $5 cake or something had to pay like a transaction cost of about $80. It's crazy.
What were you saying, Alex?
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with Craig that Bitcoin cannot be like a currency itself. But the thing is that with Bitcoin, the way it's treated is that people who even use it don't really treat it as money. They treat it as a way to make more of money that already exists in the economy. They'll invest and look for like increases in growth, and then sell at the higher, and when prices increase, to like make it volatile as well. So it can't be like a sustainable currency at all. Not long term, not really short term.
I think in the long term, it's a decent asset. I put a little bit of money in Ethereum and Bitcoin, but it is genuinely too volatile to be
a currency.
A medium of
Baker,
exchange.
what trends do you have to base off that it's a good long-term investment? How can you possibly make that statement?
Because since its inception,
naturally
for
bullish.
The past 8 years. What was that?
I get that it's been naturally bullish. I was just more joking with you more than anything. I would imagine that it would only go up in cost. That's just, if we look at it, it's been bullish, yes. Right? But
I think we've been in kind of a bull market type situation since post 08. But even when things get bad, Bitcoin doesn't do bad. Bitcoin starts to do good. So I think since it does decent when markets are doing well, but it also does decent when markets are doing pretty trash, I think it's maybe not reliable. But in the long term, like 10 years plus, it will make a consistent return on investment.
See, I don't know. I can say that 100% with gold. I can say with gold in 10 years, I will make a return on my investment.
Yes.
With
I put more money.
People, it's like, okay, so say you're an investor in 2008 or 2013, right? The cost is 20. You sell it like what, 13,000 or whatever, and you're like, well, in 10 years or you sell it 22,000, right? It's peak at that point. Mm-hmm. So 22,000. It's gonna be a good long-term investment in 5 years or something. 5 years comes around. It's like it's like $10,000, $8,000. See, with time, it really is doing nothing. Even if the overall market is bullish, it doesn't mean Bitcoin, right? Whereas I think there's more of a relationship between gold and the overall market being kind of.
I agree. I agree completely.
I guess maybe you're seeing something I'm not seeing, but I just don't understand how you can make a claim that it's going to give a return in 10 years. It could be in the same place, right? In 5 years, it could be at like $70,000, but in 10 years, it could drop all the way down to 20,000. That's why it's so volatile. Like I said, like Alex was saying, like Craig was saying, it's not good money because it doesn't allow for good economic calculation, right? That's why gold was so good, because it was stable, right? We knew its quantity was fixed, at least somewhat fixed. And we knew it was going to increase in value or increase in price or over time or whatever.
And I agree. I own gold, I own silver, and I think that on a free market, gold and silver would emerge as a currency, a used currency, an actual medium of exchange. I don't think Bitcoin would emerge as a medium of exchange. I think it will be purely an asset for the rest of our lives.
I'm pretty sure I had a conversation with someone about volatile currencies, and they made the point that that general like within the bound of society that we have, people would tend to invest in deflationary currencies or more volatile currencies for higher principal returns. But the issue is not that people would invest in them in that sense. it's being used as the medium of exchange as the sole rule of the currency. Is what he's talking about is returns on stocks and assets. He's talking about returns on something completely different from what a currency is supposed to be. People in a free market wouldn't invest in a deflationary currency for the purpose that it wouldn't be accepted because it's too volatile. The point is that acceptance dictates what a currency or a medium of exchange is. In order to be accepted, the currency would have to generally be stable. If it was hugely volatile, then there would be great risks in using them as general mediums of exchange. To count relative prices of a currency that's rapidly deflating, it's already difficult enough in a fiat currency as it is, but when a currency is rapidly going volatile up and down, and it's deflating and inflating constantly, just because there is a higher principal return does not mean it will be used as a medium of exchange. People will take a currency because it's stable. People may take returns because they're volatile in short-term investments, but that doesn't mean that a currency will be used because it has higher returns. A currency will be used because it's stable, and because it's stable, then they can account relative prices significantly better.
That's actually That's actually a really good point. I don't make that with people enough when it comes to that. I think people look at Bitcoin as the same way they look at a stock price, or they look at stock, whereas, as you just said, stock and crypto are measuring two completely different things. Whereas we know Amazon is more, we're more likely to say that Amazon's their services are, they're still going to be providing a good amount of people. They're only going to expand their services to more people. It's to be expected that their stock prices will go up in the next 10 years. We don't know.
Absolutely.
We can't say really the same thing with crypto. So I think that was a good point.
Yeah. And there could, Amazon could be the next Sears. It could go under in 5 years. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it's going to be that way. It's I don't know. It's more reliable to invest in actual, machines and capital than, a string of numbers in a computer.
Though there is also the problem with metallic or old currencies giving decently low returns for short-term investors. That doesn't seem like the best idea, but generally gold and silver seem far more reliable than anything Bitcoin can produce, purely based off its volatility. If you're going for a more stable investment, gold or metallic seem to be significantly better. But yeah, should we move on to populism, Trump's era, and war? Should we go about that route?
Yes, but before that, I need to bring something up. Somebody commented earlier when we were talking about Jordan Peterson. Somebody said that it was ironic that we said that when we brought, what was the book that he talked about? Or Lacan. When he said that Lacan was basically saying nonsense, this person said that that's ironic because he's never given a straight answer to anything. If that were the case, then he wouldn't get millions of views on YouTube. I'm not a big JP fan, but you can't deny that he says things in layman's terms. That's all I had to say.
He's a good speaker. That's the difference. Lacan
He is. You can understand what he's saying.
Lacan was an eccentric cunt that nobody could understand. Jordan Peterson is a guy for the layman. That's the difference.
And was it Foucault? How do you say the guy?
Foucault.
The French philosopher.
Foucault.
Okay, Foucault. He liked boys. He violated.
Yeah, that's every French philosopher in the fucking 1900s. Except for Camus, because he was dead.
That's true, but they weren't doing philosophy. They were just justifying their own, degenerate actions.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right, should we move on?
Craig, this is the part where we move on to abortion and talk about that till the rest of the night.
Oh God, not abortion! Don't bring that
there's
back.
2 people left. It's like verbal and some leftist. And that's,
By what measure do you? Eating me, bro.
So abortion is a topic I don't care about anymore.
Oh my! I was talking to Verbal about abortion the other day, and his contention with evictionism is just warranting the standard of gentlest means possible and proportionality. That's pretty much his sole contention, and he sort of just passes that on to Sanvi, because now she wants to debate Ethan, and that's a whole other thing.
Bro,
Hey, don't get Papa John started, because he will go all night.
yeah, he will.
On what?
Abortion, or I think are you still anti-evictionism? You used to
No,
poke fun at Scott.
I don't know. That was more of a joke with Scott. I was just
You
messing around.
photoshopped pictures of him chucking babies off of
No, that
roofs. I don't know if that was.
That was Matt. That was Matt. That was German Matt.
Oh, no, I remember that guy.
Okay,
They
gotcha.
gleamed about it.
Wait, have you guys seen the photoshopped like Instagram images of Alex debates, and where he Alex, I think you remember them. They used to be in like the Apoya Discord server, and Prodigy would always send them, and it's like, I wish systemic racism existed and was like edited.
And what do you mean it's not edited? That's what Alex said, quote unquote.
Yeah, for real.
Anywho.
Hey, will say, if we're getting into libertarian strategy, abortion is necessary for executing that libertarian strategy. We need to maintain demographics, and we maintain demographics by allowing the leftists and communists to continue to get abortions. So we have to keep the fertility rates low among the leftists.
That's really depressing.
I mean, if we're going off that metric, maybe AOC is actually secretly a mastermind right winger.
Doesn't make sense, man. They shoot themselves in the foot.
Hey, maybe climate science isn't such a sham anymore. Bro, you gotta stop having babies.
I would really be hesitant. Like, I would really take my time. If someone, like, if I was the say all, and someone asked me, okay, do we end abortion or not? I would really hesitate.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm looking at it from that lens. A year ago, I would have said yes, end it. But now I'm like, no, it actually is a good thing. Oh yeah, this is a stream.
I will say, if you look at crime rates after it was legalized in America on the federal level, they're downward. You know, correlation doesn't equal causation, but they're still downward.
I mean,
there's a silver lining to every cloud.
Yeah, we can make exceptions for that rule.
Yeah. So on a different note, what do you guys think about like Austrian economics pragmatically? Or Austrian economics is the system, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Like spreading the ideas.
I think I kind of get what you're. I think I kind of understand what you're getting at. I think that it can be packaged in a way that is understandable for the layman, like economics in one lesson, where I don't think much of the economic mainstream can say the same. Like, there's that book Freakonomics, but it's different. You know, it's not systematic in the way that economics in one lesson kind of is.
No, yeah, I kind of get what you mean. There's this separation as well, like in the institutional approaches that the Austrians take against the mainstream, because the mainstream isn't as accessible as this sort of as Austrian economics was in general, but like we've got the Mises Institute. That's foremost the biggest publisher and the biggest spreader of Austrian economics. That's pretty much undeniable at this point. But when it comes to like the sort of neoclassical orthodoxy, it doesn't come really in the form of that sort of free institutional approach. What it comes in the form of is public education and in general just like, I guess, state subordinate level, and it's this sort of level that it takes this institutional approach through education, and it takes this sort of and incorporates the neoclassical orthodoxy into economic textbooks instead of the sort of way we went through the Mises Institute, and we've published articles and books and journals and this type of stuff that's really accessible and easy to find and all this type of stuff, that we've made it accessible for anyone. But it seems to be more the case that the neoclassical orthodoxy, because they've got it compulsory, seems to be they have this sort of advantage over us, whereas we can't get that in the correct.
You're absolutely right. Like you see it in the media too. Like even Fox News, they weren't asking should we have stimulus after COVID or not. It was a given. Like no, but it's kind of to a point where some of these economic topics aren't even debated. Like some of the more ideological ones are, like the minimum wage. But even then, the conversation is completely different from what it would be if, the mainstream right was using, Austrian ideas.
No, yeah, 100%. And one of the good things that I've recently came across is the amount of like screen time people like Mark Skousen get talking about, like particularly the gross output statistic as an not as an alternative per se, but as also a complete picture of the economy as compared to just having that sort of Keynesian demand metric of GDP. So measuring business activity at the stages level and measuring value created through the actual structure of production allows us to see that sort of supply side area, whereas what we've got currently is national income that only incorporates the demand side area of consumer spending and government spending and all this type of stuff that doesn't actually stimulate the economy. What actually stimulates the economy is the creation of new goods and services and informations and technical recipes and production. And what Mark Skousen has done and what he's got a fair bit of screen time in the mainstream media doing is reporting on actual business activity, like business to business transactions and actual creation of wealth. What Keynes does is he incorporated economics in this extremely high time preference form of only incorporating demand and spending and this ridiculous circular flow model that completely discredits the future.
I think if the causal realist approach entered into the mainstream, whether that be through academia or through the media, I think that it would pick up more traction than kind of this neoclassical synthesis, just because it makes more sense even from a layman's perspective.
Yeah, no, 100%. The Austrian view is far more concerned with the individual itself rather than these abstract economic terms like cost maximization and all this nonsense that say like that's been given as in like economics textbooks, whereas Austrians focus on human action and how humans act and interact with the social structures that exist in their societies, what prices means for the individual and how they can incorporate it into their daily lives. Like I'm pretty sure there's a book called Austrian Economics Applied that incorporates this into like investing and how you should act within the economy from an Austrian standpoint. This type of thing that can be introduced from Austrian economics is far more accessible to the actual layman than is like a neoclassical or a Keynesian framework, which uses all this abstract language of marginal products and the propensity to consume and all this nonsense. It's what Austrian economics does is it's I guess, as it was put in a book title, it's a theory for real people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the best way which you can describe incorporation of Austrian economics into the mainstream, that we've generally just taken a different institutional approach, and the way that we write things and how we could spread it is by appealing to people themselves as real acting individuals with their own consciousness and own ideas. And that is what Austrian economics emphasizes, that people are different and they have different ideas and they have these mechanisms that help them coordinate their plans and to cooperate with each other. That's what Austrian economics is about. It's what free markets is about. Voluntary exchanges between people who are cooperating with the price and contract systems in order to make their positions more reliable and to work with other people. That's what it's about.
Very well put, Mr. Craig.
Yeah, the having to calculate like the propensity to consume and all that stuff, that was like fucking hell in econ class.
Yeah. I'll be honest. Just calculating a possibility production curve makes my head hurt because I suck at basic arithmetic.
Yeah, no, but when it comes to like more advanced economic classes or like even like the higher education economics, which is where it generally is only really available, it almost seems like they're trying to discourage it more than anything. Like it doesn't seem like it's actually trying to entice more economists. It seems like they're trying to discourage that field.
Yeah. Got anything to say, Brent?
I've just been thinking a lot about just kind of strategy in the masses. I've just been stuck on this. So something that I saw on Instagram, it was kind of, it's just, you know how like libertarian pages, they all kind of circulate the same stuff. Have you seen?
Yeah. Except for Papa John.
Yeah. Have you seen the one where it's talking about giving up liberty for the greater good? And it's saying that no, liberty is the greater good.
Oh yeah, I seen that. I seen that.
So my thing is that, like, well, when someone says for the greater good, usually I'm already like, okay, this is going to be something stupid, right?
Yeah.
But then it comes down to it is that not a lot of people think that way. Like, a lot of people will kind of appeal to those kind of optics. And so it's, should we kind of integrate our strategy with things like that to be more receptive to the general population's speculation, or should we again
Focus on
those
So
things?
I think that that's already been done, like by Michael Huemer, because his whole thing is like applying everyday consensus in people's moral lives. I don't know, applying that to politics and to political issues. And I think Walter Block does a pretty good job to a certain extent, saying that he believes he is right from a utilitarian point of view. He believes that his views are for the greater good, but ultimately he falls back on the self-ownership side of libertarian thought. But I absolutely think that I think Michael Huemer's and Walter Block's are necessary, and I think they both play a strong role in spreading libertarianism. But I do think that sometimes that can go too far and turn into pragmatism.
Does that? Well, I don't know. I think you may have gone a little off track. What Brent was saying. Can you say what you were saying again? Were you saying would be optical? Should we be more optical, or what? What were you saying?
Yeah, so it's like typically I wouldn't say something like for the greater good, but should we start like that meme that's saying freedom is the greater good? Should we start kind of giving into those optics so general populace is more receptive to our ideas?
I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I would be I would be skeptical. I have to think about that, but I would say, I don't know, if I don't know, you have to do a little study. Does that really appeal to our demographics? The people, I don't know. That's
I would
interesting.
say no, honestly, purely for the reasons that the greater good would indicate that something is desirable only like slightly relative to something else, whereas in the general sense of things, freedom is desirable. Like freedom is a desirable thing in the whole. Whether or not there's these relative options, freedom comes first because it is desirable, not because it's the greater good over something else or because everything else is worse. Freedom is desirable as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So
I agree. I do like that saying though, that response, the liberty is the greater good. I think that's a good little comeback.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that.
So kind of what I was trying to get at more of is, instead of like just that specifically, it's that should we give into the kind of optical view of where when most people would say for the greater good, us libertarians wouldn't, but should we kind of give into those optics?
I just don't know. I don't know if that's the best messaging. There's so much better messaging we can go about than just saying freedom is the greater good. Does anyone else like feel that way, or am I completely alone on that?
No, I think you're right. Like instead of saying, oh, we shouldn't go to war, it's for the greater good if we don't go to war, we should say, yeah, we shouldn't go to war because millions of people are going to die. Thousands of Americans are going to die. We're going to kill hundreds of thousands of civilians. It's going to, put us in debt. Say why it's a bad thing and say why it would be better than the other thing from from a moral view and from a, I don't know, utilitarian view.
Yeah, I guess I take a bit more stubborn stance on it in the sense that I view things as desirable within themselves, not because they're because everything else is worse than them. Like I don't view freedom as desirable because Keynesianism or statism is worse than it. More so that freedom or free markets or whatever is desirable because it's free markets, because of what it attains. It's desirable. So in that sense, that I like when you apply it to war, we shouldn't go to war for the reasons that it is war and its consequences for it. It's not that not going to war would be for the greater good or whatever. It's the sense that war is bad because it's war, and thousands and millions of people are going to lose their lives. We're going to lose tons out on it. It's purely for the reasons that this is war. War is bad. We do not desire war. War is not desirable. Therefore, we shouldn't go for war. It's the stone cold stance, I guess.
And I agree, but then what if somebody said, "Oh no,
I don't know. I think Scott Horton on the messaging of war is probably the best because he drives it home. Because I think with Scott Horton and a lot of these LPMC guys, they're not appeasers. They do not really. They hate the left, but they also know, but they also fight for liberty. You know, this saying among like a lot of libertarian, like the Beltway libertarians, you can't hate the left and be for liberty. I think you can. I think you can hate the left and be for liberty. And I think Scott Horton really nails that down. He kind of makes an enemy kind of with the left when he messages, but it's not particular. It's more with politicians. He goes, these politicians, they're sending our sons and daughters over to fight wars, not for the interests of Americans, but for the interests of these big multinational corporations and these politicians' wallets and so much. So I think in terms of messaging, I think Scott Horton and those guys would probably be kind of the law on that. I don't know. It's interesting.
I agree, because he does a good job at explaining why war is bad in and of itself, but he also gives a lot of good examples as to the tragic outcomes of war.
Yeah, no, it's definitely Scott Horton's messaging of war is incredible. Like the timing of his book, currently that came out was incredible. The podcast and messaging on it was great. The book itself, fantastic. The idea is like that even Goodfried Bloom presented this as well, that we're sending people over for no apparent reason to do anything, like the war on terror. What the hell has come out of that? Have we been successful in our goals? No, the fuck we haven't. Have we been successful in anything we've tried to accomplish? Nope. Have we actually made a positive impact in these places? Nope. Have we completely destabilized them? You better fuck your ass, we dead. It's literally like, it's completely fucking, it's insane. It's literally insane that we're still going with this. And what Scott Horton does is he presents it in such a way it's stone cold. Like, it's for sure, this has been a complete and utter failure. And your family and your friends and all of these people that you could be enjoying your life with in this comprehensive liberal democracy with freedom and whatever else the American values are supposed to support, what instead is happening is they're sitting over in Iraq for no apparent reason from something that happened like multiple decades ago that was probably caused by the American government in the first place. And not even just that, it's not even like the American government is controlling itself. Like, it is 100% certain that bin Laden has been controlling the geopolitical scale since his death. Ever since that happened, he has been absolutely controlling them. And it all seems way too oblivious. It really does. And this sort of thing that politicians keep doing, they're completely unrelated. They don't know your family, they don't know your friends, yet they still feel they have the right to send them out to Iraq where there's actually no threat to you and destabilize their nations for doing absolutely no good for anything. And it's insane that we can continue going with this. War fundamentally has always been a failure, has always been destructive, and we have never gained anything out of it.
Scott Horton's a legend, and he does such a good job at presenting the libertarian worldview towards war. My favorite thing that he does is he'll present an accurate depiction of like modern neoconservative geopolitical views. Like, oh, the terrorists are fighting us because they hate our freedom. And then he'll be like, they don't hate you because of your freedom. They hate you because we've been bombing their children for the past 30 years. And then he'll like read a letter from bin Laden saying exactly why he bombed the Twin Towers. And all three of them are because of the United States. That doesn't make it the United States' fault. That doesn't make it the people's fault. But it does make it but there should be people in Washington who face consequences as well as Osama bin Laden because as a result of those towers' fall.
What we shouldn't do is we have this messaging, and we understand why he done it because he explicitly states why he done it. And what we're doing is the exact same thing and enticing the exact same thing all over again.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, that's what Ron Paul said, even during his the Giuliani moment. He was like, look, they're killing us because we've been killing them. The more we kill them, the less safe that we're going to be.
100%. It's really just it's a cycle of geopolitical revenge. That's all it is, and it won't stop because we start having these. We invade somewhere, they become resentful, power becomes destabilized, political systems fail, they become resentful, they send military forces here, and then we say, oh, looks like they're trying to attack us, it's in the interest of our citizens to send military troops, and it's a constant cycle of push and pull, and it never ends up anywhere. It has never ended up anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so earlier we were talking about like sympathizing with the left, to like the pragmatic caucus, or I guess pragmatic libertarians doing that. And especially on the issue of war, that can be really, really dangerous, because a lot of them say that they're against intervention. They say that we should, get out of the Middle East, and obviously we should. But then a few paragraphs down, they'll say we need to do these things so we can focus on Russia, or so we can focus on China. And that is something that Scott Horton pokes at a lot, especially in his new book. And I think that we can't ignore that, because we genuinely have no allies outside of like the libertarian movement itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the case with NATO as well, because they use this sort of Russia excuse, or whatever the hell this is supposed to mean, and then they say, oh look, they're expanding their territories. Well, they're expanding their territories because you're sending British and Canadian troops into places that they have nothing to do with. Obviously they're going to expand their territories when you're inflicting them, when you're causing this conflict that you should never be involved with in the first place.
Exactly. Yes.
It's the exact same thing as fucking Vietnam. America created Vietnam and then went to fucking war with it. What the fuck? It's like, it's utterly insane. And then when you have this Russia threat or whatever, the Russia threat is long fucking over, and then you decide, oh well, I want to keep NATO going to continue receiving this funding, so I'm going to send British and Canadian troops into Russian territories where they have absolutely nothing to do with, and Russia hasn't incited anything. Oh, look, Russia's now expanded its territories to counteract us. Oh, well, we must go into Russia now. We have to establish a further NATO and more totalitarian powers. Whoops. And it's like, well, whose fucking fault is that?
It's the same thing with China. I mean, we've been pushing into the South China Sea since, the Cold War ended. So they've decided, yeah, we're going to do some island hopping. We're going to build some bases. We'd do the same thing if China was in the Gulf of Mexico. We wouldn't be happy about that. So clearly they're going to expand their territory the more we push in on.
Exactly.
And I say we. I say we. I shouldn't say we. I should say the federal government.
And the piggyback on the Russia thing, the whole thing about Russia, literally, what the whole British and Canadian thing, that is literally almost deja vu of what happened. Like when the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO pushed all of our troops to literally the border of Russia, and we got Putin and all these tough guys as a result of America pushing all of our troops literally to the border of Russia when Russia surrendered, when Russia gave up and completely, when the USSR collapsed, right? So that again, interventionism is, here we are we're with Putin because of our interventionism 20, 30 years ago, or 40 years ago at this point, yeah.
100%.
Oh, can I ask Papa John the red button question? Okay, so Papa John, Scott Horton and Michael Malice have very different answers to this. If you had a red button that you could press that would end the state instantly, would you press it?
Okay. I've heard some reiteration of this with Dave Smith and them, and gosh, it's really hard to say, because
it is.
All my strategy points to people who say we would obliterate the state overnight. I don't agree with that. I think all the ways we reach our libertarian society does not involve an instant destruction of the state, right? It involves slow privatization into that, I would, you know what I mean? As opposed to kind of that instant. So if you instantly ended the state at all its functions, and the police, and dude, that is a really tough question. I mean, I don't know.
And I mean, I think your answer was kind of the best answer that you can give. Like, it's the least risky answer, I think. I think it's the most obvious, but I don't know. That it's a very tough question.
If I knew that we were heading towards I'm not entirely optimistic for the future, but I'm not entirely pessimistic, right? there would be a point in time, maybe, you know, if I have a nice little farm out in the countryside or whatever, and really if we ended the state, you know, it's not like I need the police to begin with. So if I just ended the state, then, you know, well, there we go, right? So it'd be interesting to see who rises up, right? You know, are any of the state's assets there? Are they just completely liquidizing everything? Are they selling to people? You know, who knows? I mean, I would definitely pull the trigger on that if I knew I was going to be okay. You know, obviously, you know, us being in Nashville, it's not it's not really a great thing. But yeah,
the Nashvillians get a little crazy. They get crazy when Chick-fil-A runs out of chicken. God knows what would happen if the police stopped coming.
Yes, that's funny. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't have anything. You go ahead.
Okay. So this is going back to something that earlier that Craig was talking about when he was saying, hey, what do we value more, like free markets or anarchism, right? Or anarchy. And so what I was want like what you guys' thoughts were on how far we should try to push statewide or like statewise for like, should we at least try to get to maybe like a classical liberal type state while trying to push more or like focus more on a free market, or do you think that'll kind of naturally take place while we?
So I think a free market is impossible to achieve unless we have some like Tom Woods type nullification and decentralization, because otherwise, you see, Texas is going to go blue eventually, inevitable. And you know, neither party is exactly free market. I think the Republicans could be free market, like especially on a local level. Republicans tend to be, you know, spend less. But I think on a federal level, where the federal government has so much centralized power, we have to focus on like decentralization. You know, I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, personally, I would say that in order to have a free market, first of all, the first step is the Constitution needs to be completely revised. That everything from the 14th Amendment has to go. It's like everything.
Yeah, 13 and up.
Yeah, there needs to be a formal revision of the Constitution back to what the founding fathers actually intended. And essentially, what I believe from that point on is that rather than giving the sort of powers to interpret the Constitution over the federal government, what should then happen is a vast decentralization of power, particularly to the states, and then continually down to local levels. Like we've particularly done this in the UK, where we have like local governments. Have South Lanarkshire here, which are shit, by the way, but regardless, people don't care about local elections, though they should. And essentially what I believe that the local government should have significantly more power than the federal government, and only in absolute bailout crises should the federal government be allowed to intervene in places and various stuff like that. But obviously there's interstate jurisdiction and all those types of issues. But what I believe is a localist strategy, which decentralizes power from the federal government to local governments and state governments, and that would allow for an opening up of the market, I guess. And even if it wouldn't allow for an opening up of the market, there's at least the possibility that governments can respond more directly to the needs of their constituents. And in that way, the knowledge problem of governments themselves and the deployment of police forces can be held more accountable in that sense.
I completely agree. But Craig, I've got a question for you. I'm only asking this because I don't know, I know hardly anything about Scottish history. I don't know how much you know about American history. Are you familiar with the Articles of Confederation?
Yeah.
Okay. That's my thing. I know it'd be impossible to have a constitutional convention and reinstate the Articles of Confederation, but I think that is the optimum strategy, or to at least somehow make the Constitution look more like it did in the beginning, like actual federalism, a collection of states, not,
I mean, there were
one
some
body
with the articles.
Yes, it was not perfect, but let's be honest, governments are inherently imperfect.
I think, okay, this is a good one. I think in terms of the Constitution versus the Articles, I think the Constitution did better because it did not allow states to place tariffs on each other. And it allowed the government to have somewhat more of a tax base. I know I just sounded like the biggest statist in the world, but there was some legitimacy to the threat of Britain, and so there was some sort of need for government, right? Because the reality of it was the South didn't really even care to be with the North to begin with. They didn't even really care to be with independent, because they had a good deal with the British, right? They could literally just trade textiles and cotton, right? They had a good deal going. So in a little bit of that regard, I guess so. But in terms of the articles, if the articles were stricter on allowing for interstate commerce, like they weren't allowed, like states were not allowed to place tariffs on each other, but they were allowed to freely leave, I suppose I really have no problem with the articles. But in terms of creating an army, I mean, that was really a voluntary thing. And I mean, historically, decentralized states have really been bad at protecting itself from centralized threats. So that, like I said, it's an interesting thing. But I know you're gonna pick apart it, but just please, just take that with a grain of salt.
I will. I agree with what you're saying. Like, the Constitution did a good job at like keeping interstate commerce regular.
I should clarify. The Constitution was really bad in the regard that it were very ambiguous in certain regards.
Yes.
Just the necessary. Like I said, I'm not a fan of the Constitution. I'm not, but it was very ambiguous. So I'm not a fan of ambiguity.
Yes, but here's the one little spot that I'm going to poke at. You said that there was good justification for the Constitution because Britain was a real threat. We had 2 wars with England, one under the Articles of Confederation, one under the Constitution. We did better under the Articles of Confederation against the British than we did during the War of 1812. But even though we had a more centralized army, a more centralized federal government, a more centralized form of taxation, a more centralized form of banking, I don't know why that is. That's just an observation that I'm going to make.
That's good. And in terms of the war you're pointing to, which one are you pointing? Are you just talking about like the pirate wars in terms of like us having conflicts with them in the Atlantic, or which one in particular?
Oh, the Revolutionary War.
I wouldn't say that was necessarily the articles. I guess that was our framing after that point. But at that point, we had already received most. Yeah, I guess so. You're right. I guess you would be right in terms of that regard. Yeah, that's a good point. And then 1812. Yeah, that's a good point. That's really, I didn't think of it in terms like that. But I do think in terms of the articles, I think the problem was the tariff problem. I think that was like what we saw immediately after was these states. We had a partial barter system, right? Because we all had separate currencies, state issued currencies that were hard to convert into gold, and then so that was a bit of a problem. Yeah, but the taxation. Yeah, that
one thing. Between the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, they kind of switched problems on a specific issue, and that was secession and like adding states to the Union. The Constitution did a really, really good job at outlining how to add states to the Union, but unlike the Articles of Confederation, it had no way to. It didn't outline how to remove states from the Union. It's because the Federalists, they kind of won. You know, they formed the centralized state that they were looking for, and to me, that and the Supreme Court and obviously a few ambiguous clauses in the Constitution are the main problems with the Constitution. And I think if those were overturned, if we had a way, an outlined way to remove states or for states to remove themselves, if we got rid of some ambiguous language in the Constitution, and I forgot what my other point was, but if we did the other point that I was talking about, I think the Constitution would be a lot more successful.
I agree. I mean, anyone want to talk about the Civil War, or do we want to move on to the next topic?
Man, we're 2 Southerners. I don't think they'd like what we have to say.
What was the Civil War about? Was it about slavery? Was it about states' rights?
So it was about states' rights to slavery, states' rights to not be taxed like a lot. It was about banking to a certain extent. I already said tariffs, taxation. And genuinely, it was about it was I guess how do I say this, a carried over issue from the nation's founding, the idea of centralized power versus national power, or versus localized power,
What I
but
think it's
mainly slavery.
I think what it's interesting to point out is most of the states seceded after Fort Sumter, right? They seceded after the attack on Fort Sumter. So I think that is an important thing to point out, because it's like these states hadn't seceded yet. It was still open to negotiations. It wasn't until Fort Sumter happened that they really had ruled out any type of like, well, we're not going to negotiate anymore. And that's actually another important or interesting topic. The whole idea of strategy. What's the best way we, reach our libertarian state? I'm sure you guys have already talked about it, but the Civil War was an elitist. It wasn't really a populist thing. I mean, obviously populism had a lot to do with it. There was a huge resentment for the South, but it made it really easy. But I think a lot of it came from these elite agricultural, big agricultural industry.
Absolutely.
That really was negatively impacted by the North. And I just don't think we can have an effective libertarian strategy without at least at least some big industry backing, right? Unless if there's some sort of elite backing where it's like, I don't know, like say the car industry, right, is really negatively impacted by, or the federal government starts attacking all these big corporations. There you go.
Okay, I've got a question for you. So I will clarify. Slavery is bad. The South was bad. The North was bad. The South was bad because they had slaves. The North was bad because they slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Southerners. Anyway, if the South never created armies, if the South never kicked out Union armies Union armies from the South, what do you think would happen? What do you think the North would have done?
Say that one more. So if the South hadn't kicked out Union armies, and if the South hadn't, what was the other one?
If the South had never formed armies, if they didn't, get militia groups together.
Well, I just don't. I think it was the point. I just don't know if they really. I don't know if they really had a big playbook, because you'd already seen they already gone through multiple nullification crises where they tried to constitutionally go about removing some of these tariffs. At which point, Andrew Jackson sends an entire army down to stop a constitutional process, right? So, and this happened, I think, another 2 times, right? So they attempted nullification, at which point, like I said, and Tom DiLorenzo talks about this, the original aggressor is the North for violating the contract, which is the Constitution, because South was going about a constitutional process, and the North was the first aggressor when they broke that constitutional process. They broke the contract, so to speak.
Yeah, so I agree. But here's what I'm getting at. Do you think if today, okay.
Oh, if it would have happened or what?
No. So the Civil War, obviously, the nation was very polarized about slavery. It was a great evil. The North recognized that. The rich elite in the South refused to recognize that because they were profiting off of it. Today, we're kind of polarized to a certain extent over the issue of abortion. If some states decided to secede or nullify some of these abortion laws, do you think that it could get violent like it did back then? And what do you think? Yeah, I guess that's my question.
I mean, I have no reason to think it would get violent because today's political or the industrial elite and the political elite are too well connected, right? They all are on the same, they're all in speaking terms, right? We may think of Greg Abbott as some, oh, he's the best, man, he's fighting back. But at the end of the day, Greg Abbott is hanging out with all these big people from federal government, and he's hanging out with people from all these big corporations. So I just don't really see how whereas in 1865 or 1860, I just don't know how much communication the agricultural elite had with the kind of industrial elite in the north. You know, if that makes sense, right? I think does that make sense? Because
No,
maybe
that does make sense. I see what you're saying. I think I agree.
I think there's bigger communication between the elite today as opposed to then. So I think that kind of stuff is happening. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely that anything violent could ever arise from that, or a secession movement could possibly happen. I don't know. Does anyone else? Does anyone think differently? Am I completely alone on that? Because I don't think we could see anything violent arise from an abortion issue. I just don't. I think the politically connected have a lot to lose by secession.
And I just think that the level of just like the average person is just at most performative. And it's fair to say. Like, of course, like people can be passionate, but it's a lot of just performative activism. I don't think that there would be actually a lot of
Whereas in the 1860s, their pockets were hurting. This abortion is not a pocket hurting issue.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas tariffs and all these things that negatively affects the South, and you know, I think if I don't know, I'm trying to think of a similar example outside of I just kind of listed the car, like the auto industry, if sudden these. I don't know, maybe like a coal state, right?
I was about to say if coal was still as big as it was, I think that would, I don't know, that'd cause some people.
Yeah, I mean,
even natural gas, but at the same time, the way that green energy is being subsidized so heavily, right? It'd be different if it was just it would be different if all of a sudden the federal government came in and started banning greenhouse or natural gas and stuff, but didn't provide any subsidization, right? There's a reason why Exxon and all these big oil companies are switching to green energy, because that's where all the money's going, right? And they can afford it because of subsidization. But if you told Exxon, hey, that's it, you're not allowed to produce natural gas, what now? It's like, well, you got to do green energy. Well, that's just not profitable. That doesn't make any money, right? We're gonna be charging super high, you know what I mean? But the fact that it's getting subsidized, that helps tremendously. I think you maybe cut those trends. I think maybe then you might have something.
No, yeah, you're completely right. When it comes to like the renewable energies industry, like there's a practice that's fairly common in there, with literal negative pricing, where they sell their loads of energy for negative amounts, and I believe it's like over 70% of renewable energy industry's income that's purely derived from subsidies. It's crazy the amount that's that wind farms and solar energy are subsidized. If you read my article on the Texas freeze, I covered this a lot. It's the amount of the amount of subsidies that are actually in that industry constitute the vast majority of producer incomes and accounting data in terms of profits. Like it's so negligible, like the prices that some of them actually sell packages of energy for, they pay other people to take them. It's crazy the amount of subsidies that are in that renewable energy industry. But are you guys ready to move on? We should probably wrap this up soon as we go for the 2 hours.
Yep.
Oh, for real?
We've been going for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
I'll put one more question out. If you guys want me to do that, I can do. Because I wanted to ask how you guys viewed the Trump era populism with the sort of anti-war stuff and the anti-immigration, and what you thought the relationship between our Libertarian Party and how we could exploit that Trump era populism.
I mean,
I think that there's definitely been kind of just this ideological shift in people, because like the term like a closeted conservative, these people that are calling themselves libertarians, but they're not, right? They're just purely just a label. And I feel like with Trump, people thinking he's a libertarian, that's really kind of hurt the name of our ideology in a way. He's kind of just allowed that way too much, and I forgot where I was going with this. Give me a sec. Someone else go on.
Oh,
I'll go just until you think of what you're saying. So what really bothers me is I see this all the time. Like my friends will say this. I see this on TikTok, Instagram. People saying that libertarians are just closeted Republicans, and I think a lot of that has to do with the 2016 campaign. Donald Trump, the libertarian candidate whose name I always forget, that like faked the seizure.
Johnson.
Yeah, Gary Johnson faked the seizure on live television. I think that's one reason why we're looked at so poorly.
Because they're all appeasers. They just like to appease the left, like to play it down the middle. They're beltway libertarians. And
exactly.
I think in terms of, I think Trump going into the office was kind of hopeful because he was an outsider. In terms of what you were talking about, the anti-immigration and anti-war, those are two really good talking points that the white, straight demographics love to eat the fuck up. And I know I don't want to get into that, but the demographic thing. But the point is there's a huge demographic of Americans, majority of demographic of Americans, who really like the anti-immigration and the the war sentiment, right? America first. And particularly the anti-immigration one. Steve Bannon was talking about this. He's like, until Trump started talking about immigration, he wasn't really big. Like he wasn't really getting these huge, stirring up the crowd. And then he started talking about build the wall. And then all of a sudden, these crowds started going crazy because they're saying, build the wall, keep them out, right? They're stealing our jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Here's what I think about that. I think that that's a way, kind of a scapegoat for low-income whites to like, kind of an excuse for their problems. The same way that a lot of like middle-class white people use the Black Lives Matter movement to like make themselves feel better than, lower-class whites who don't really care about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's the same thing. It's just the other way around.
Over here, we essentially have an entire movement of that. It's called the English Defense League, I believe its name is. It's essentially just a load of lower middle class white men revolting against immigrants for the sole reasons of prejudice and community issues. But like obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of immigration as a whole. I'm not the biggest fan of multiculturalism, but what has been going on with the actual anti-immigration movements themselves are purely subjective excuses for personal failures for the most part.
If anything, if you think about talking about exploit, you said how can we exploit these bases? You can exploit these bases because at that point, if you just have anti-immigration, I mean, Ron Paul was anti-immigration, and he was the same. And if you really want to know my views on immigration, I'm not against it for any economical reason. I'm against it for strategy at the finest, because if it really comes down to it, you can exploit these huge demographics, like I said, the Trump demographic, these evangelical white straight males and these white people, and you can exploit them for simply being a voting base, a big ass voting bloc. And so we can get libertarians into power. I have a post that Rothbard talks about it a lot. You need someone who can really gaslight the media, who can literally go, he doesn't need the media to communicate to people. He literally, the people just love him that much, right? And that's exactly what Trump was. Unfortunately, Trump wasn't a libertarian.
This is why we need President Dave Smith with Press Secretary Michael Malice.
I think Dave Smith will be the libertarian to get the 5%. Like I said, any actual person is not any legitimate libertarian is not looking at this and saying, okay, he's actually going to win the presidency. And these people from the lesser extent, I mean, the pragmatic caucus, there is a role for them because they are really big in the canvassing and doing all that, the whole campaigning stuff. But like the loser brigade and these other idiots, they go in, like Michael Malice is this is the highest position for the lowest people because they genuinely believe the libertarian win presidency. Like, we don't need to be using the libertarian platform as a way to actually achieve presidency. We need to use it as a way to achieve our goals on a local level, right? The paleo strategy, right? To go in from a ground up level, not a top down, president or something. We're reaching, we're going way beyond what we can actually achieve by trying to get presidency.
Yeah, 100%. All right, should we wrap this up then? It's been about an hour and 15 minutes, or 2 hours and 15 minutes actually. So we should
Yeah.
probably wrap this up.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just give a conclusion. We got everyone here. It was a great discussion. We're gonna have more stuff coming this summer. Stay tuned. Thanks to you all for staying for this long if you're still here. And let's call it a day.